Okay. And can you show the transcript? Okay. Cool. Session is recorded. So basically that should work out. Is the chat. So we are working on those 10 problems and we are discussing the 10 problems in the homework. There are certain rules for this thing. I'll type out the rules so that it makes more sense. Oh, come on. So first thing is no need to ask user for input. Assume array is predefined. Make sure code works for other arrays. Number two, output is not to be printed directly. Store output in separate array. Print array separately in display block. These are the only two rules that we need to follow for our submission. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we are going to assume that the array size is going to be 10 for all time. We are only going to be working with this array size of 10. We are going to call our input array INP ARR of size 10. We are going to assume that the user has given these numbers. However, your code should work even if the numbers are different. The array size will still remain the same, but the TA will, for example, change the arrays to something like this. So for example, you will just have your array defined, and we'll have a worked out example for number 2 soon. But we will check so you will define your array and we'll fill out the float output array of size 10 as well into something. But we can also, when we are grading your thing, we can change your array to other numbers and so on. And your code, even if your array is still hard coded, should work with these different numbers. Okay, does that make sense? So you'll make your code general enough that it works for all input numbers. However, you do not need to ask the user for input. You just predefine the array. We do not need the loop for that. Does it make sense? Please type in yes or no in the chat. Yes, Engwen, how can I help? Okay. On that note, if anybody wants to, they can just raise their hands like this. That will show a hand raised up like this. I'll try to look into it and also answer your questions. If not, just type out your question in the chat. If not, just yell out the question. That will also work. I'll also do the chat and I'll turn off my camera. No point. I'll stop raising my hand. All right. So what is required? Write a program to add 10% commission to an array of values. So 9 will become 9.9, 7 will become 7.7, 2 will become 2.2, 25 will become 10% of 25 is 2.5. So 25 will become 27.5 and so on. Since we are adding 10% to these array values, we are going to assume that the arrays are float because we'll be getting decimal point values. Your code should store the results in a separate output array and then print out the results. Problem number 2. So problem number 1, you'll go over each element one by one, add 10%, store it into the output array. Add 10% to 9. Imagine that you're getting these numbers one by one for each of those elements. You'll basically look at that number, compute, add 10% to it. So that will basically be 9 plus 10% of 9. So you'll have 9 plus 10% of 9 is 0.9. So if 9 is the current array element, it would look something like ARR of I plus ARR, or basically 10 divided by 100 times, or I should say just 0.1 to avoid integer division issues, times 10% of ARR of I. Add that up and you get the new value, right? So that is how you're going to go over each element and add the thing and store it into the output array, respectively. The second problem is slightly more tricky. It asks you to filter out elements. So write a program that filters out all numbers greater than 10 from the array. Your code should store the results in an output array and then print out the results. So we will again go over each of the elements one by one, and we are going to only filter out numbers that are greater than 10 and store it in the output array. The caveat here is that while you're storing it, your output array should look like this. That is, all of the numbers packed to the left as much as possible. So you look at 9, 9 is not greater than 10, move on. 7 not greater than 10, move on. 2 not greater than 10, move on. 4, move on. 25 is greater than 10. 25 will not be going here. 25 will be going here. Then 23 is greater than 10, so it goes here. 2 is not, move on. 8 is not, move on. 10 is not greater than 10. We want greater than, not greater than or equals to, so move on. 20 is greater than 10, so 20 gets added here. So that is the problem for problem number 2. We'll discuss this in a second. Problem number 3 is slightly trickier. It says that given an array of numbers, find a subspan of the array that adds up to that number. So for example, if the target is 18, I can start from 0 all the way to 0, 1, 2, and I can add up these three numbers to get 18. I can add up these three numbers to get 80. For example, if the target is 10, the user will provide a target. The array is going to be fixed. If the target is 10, you can say that we can start from 6 to 7 and add that up to 10. If the target is 11, you will say that there is no way I can find a sub-array that adds up to 11. Yes, 9 here and 2 here do add up to 11. But remember, I want a contiguous subspan of an array. So it has to be a contiguous array or nothing at all. And there is no contiguous set of elements, one after the other, that adds up to 11. Okay. Is this problem clear? I'll be discussing this thing tomorrow as well. Is problem number 3 clear? Okay. Then we have problem number 4. Problem number 4 says you are given an array and your job is to flip this array. That is, the first element becomes the last element. The second element becomes the second to last element. The last element becomes first element. So 9, 7, 2, 4, 25, 23, 2, 8, 10, 20 becomes 20, 10, 8, 2, 23, 25, 4, 2, 7, 9. Cool. Next comes problem number 5, which is somewhat similar to problem number 2, but in a different way. Write a program to check for primes in the input array. Make sure that the results are shown as below. So the numbers are 9, 7, 2, 4, 25, and so on. You will detect in every number and you will see if that number is prime. If it is prime, you will store it into the output array. But again, you'll be packing it to the left. That is how it is similar. So 9 is not prime. Move on. Why is there a... This should be 7 first. 7 is prime, so 7 comes in first. Then 2 is prime, 2 comes in here. 4 is not prime, 25 is not prime, 23 is prime, so 23 comes in here. 2 is prime again, even if it's a duplicate, you will just put it here. 8, 10, and 20 are not prime, so skip. Write a program to compute the cumulative sum of an input array. So you'll create your output array like this. Remember not to hard code the answers. We'll be changing the arrays just to make sure that the code still runs. But you can assume that the input is already given. But do assume that input is given. So here we are saying that we are going to compute the cumulative sum of an input array. Cumulative sum is very easy. The first number is the first number, so 9 becomes 9. The second number is the sum of the first two numbers, so 16. The third number is the sum of the first three numbers, so 972. The fourth number is the sum, so 18, as you can see here. The fourth number is 22, that is 9 plus 7 plus 2 plus 4. Or if you think about it, 18 plus 4 is also 22. 22 plus 25 is 27, or 9724 25 is 47. Then we have 70, then we have 72, 80, 90, 110. So that is the cumulative sum of an array. Given an array, create a new array such that any given number is the sum of all the previous numbers of the original thing. Okay. Does the concept of a cumulative sum make sense? Everybody else, Donald, uh, uh, Supuni, Engwen, Albers, does it make sense? The cumulative something. Awesome. The next one is a reverse cumulative sum. So the same thing, but this time from behind. So 20 remains 20. The next number is the sum of 10 and 20. So 30. Then we have 20 plus 10 plus 8, 38. Then we have 40, as you can see here. Then we have 63. Then we have 88, 92, 94, 101, 110. The last number will be the same for both, but this time we are adding from the end. Here we were adding from the beginning. Okay. Now, problem number 8. Problem number 8 says rotate an input array 3 times to the right. So this is the original input array. We are going to rotate it to the right. Rotation means we are going to shift everything to the right, which means that this last element is going to drop out of this thing. This last element is we are going to add it, cycle it back, and add it to the front. So if I rotate it once, this is what it looks like. 9, 7, 2, 4, 25, 23, 2, 8, 10, 20 get shifted by 1. 9, 7, 2, 4, 25, 23, 2, 8, 10. 20 drops off, comes back to the front. So 20 comes in here. If we rotate it again or twice, we shift it twice. So 9, 7, 2, 4, 25, 23, 2, 8. 10 and 20 dropped off. 20 goes in, then 10 goes in, and we have this thing. And finally, this thing and the three numbers comes in to the left like this. Okay, so that is how you are rotating an array 3 times. Cool. Now we have transpose of a matrix. So this is a matrix with 3 rows and 4 columns. So if you guys remember what a transpose was, it was basically the first row, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, will become the first column. Okay, so our matrix initially is a 3 by 4 matrix. What does it look like? So 1 in the first element, 2, 3, 4. That's our first row. Second row is 5, 6, 7, 8. That's our second row. Third row is 9, 10, 11, 12. That's our third row. So 3 rows, each having 4 elements. If we transpose this, rows become columns, columns become rows. So can you guys tell me what will be the size of the resultant matrix if you want to transpose this thing. You wanted these all in separate note fields, then all combined in one word flow diagram, right? So Gabe, good question. So you'll be submitting 11 files altogether. So one PDF file and 10 CPP files. Can you guys tell me what will be the size of the transpose matrix? Remember, when we are creating an array, we will also be needing, so this was our input array, right? INP underscore ARR. What will be the size of our output array? How should we declare our output array? Int out ARR what? We are going to transpose the matrix. So the new matrix is going to look like this, where the first row is the first column, the second row is the second column, the third row is the third column. Rows have become columns, columns have become rows. Remember the L sign, the first digit represents the number of rows, the second digit represents the number of columns. So if we have to create an output array matrix to store this transpose result, what should be the output array matrix declaration? Int out underscore ARR, what here and what here. 4 by 3. Do you guys agree with Gabe's answer? Awesome. So this one will become 4. This one will become 3. And you can see what you can do for this one. It's basically going to be output ARR of column comma row equals to input ARR of row comma column, right? Okay. Now, finally, the last one. The last one is just a simple game thing. This is not your game project. This is just a simple game test. Write a program that checks a given tic-tac-toe board. You guys played tic-tac-toe before. If not, tic-tac-toe is um, um, crisscrosses. I think that's what you guys also call it. So essentially in the board, you put a cross or an O. You can check online on the rules of this thing. But if a user gets a diagonal thing or a straight, all three X's or all three O's, they win. Your job is to take up 3 by 3 matrix given board and you will check whether X won or O won or nobody won. So for example, given this board, we have a character array board, and we will see that we have an row for all three x's. With this, your program should determine that X is the winner. For this one, we see that there is no place where three things match up. So your program in this case should say none is the winner. In here, we see that O's match up. So you will basically say O is the winner. Okay. Quick question. Will we ask the user for tic-tac-toe board? So quick, good question. So that was what I was going to. So you do not need to ask the user for a tic-tac-toe board. Assume that the board is given, but make sure that your code works for any board. We will be changing the board to see if it still works. Okay, cool. Any questions about the homework so far? If you want to, you can feel free to talk. That is also fine. But remember, this session is recorded. I believe the chats are not recorded, but yeah. Any questions about the homework? Cool. So remember, the code is very easy to write for this homework. The majority of the time that will be taken up by you guys will be for the flowchart diagrams and the dry runs. We are going to do the flowchart diagram and the dry run and the code for problem number 2. I think I'll be pasting things there on Discord as well. But yeah, so let us begin with problem number 2. What was problem number 2? Write a program that filters out all numbers greater than 10 from the array. Your code should store the results in an output array and then print out the results. So this is the given input array. So I'll start up online GDB and we will basically move from there. Hold on. Okay. So I'll start up online GDB, zoom in a bit. So hash include problem array underscore. Hash include IO stream using namespace std int main brackets open and closed return 0. So that's your startup code. Let me open up this problem on the side. Classic. Okay, we'll open up the code on this side. I'll move the okay. So this is the array problem. Firstly, we are going to create our input block, process block. So our input block, we'll process it later, I guess. But we'll be processing it here. And our display block. So first things first, let us just write a simple enough code that just copies this array into the output array and prints it out. We will then modify it to solve our problem. Let me also open up the chat while I can see this thing. Okay, if you have any questions, I have the chat window open. If you have any questions, feel free to just type out the question. I'll find it out here. Okay, so in the input block, we are going to assume that the input is already given. If I click on it here, it will go away. This box. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to assume that the user input is given, and I'm going to create an array of size 10 with these numbers. Ideally, we are going to create an output array that should look like this, but it is uninitialized for the moment. But I'll be storing the result of this input array here. We are going to do this later, but first we are just going to copy the input array into the output array. Okay, so for that, what do we need to do? And then once we do that, we are just going to print out the output array. So for now, we are just going to copy for the moment. But then we are going to print out the output array. So for int I equals to 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. We are just going to print out the output array out underscore arr of I, maybe with a comma. If we do this and we run this particular code, we should get garbage values for the output array. If we print out the input array instead, so inp array, we will see that it prints out the individual numbers from 9, 7, 2, 4, 25, 23, 2, 8, 10, and 20. Output array, however, is uninitialized, and we would like to first copy all of the elements into the output array and then print it out. So if we just want to copy it out, we can just have, can you guys tell me how many loops to copy the thing? How many loops to copy? Do you guys agree with Gabe's answer? Yep. Cool. So each one loop going over each element one by one. I see 9, I copy 9. I see 7, I copy 7. I see 2, I copy 2, and so on. So I'll basically say I equals to 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. And then all I'm going to do, can somebody type in the code here that I'll paste that will copy the input array into the output array? Should it be like this? Out underscore ARR 2 times I equals to in ARR of I. Should it be like this? Hmm. Then can somebody give me the right one? Yes. So basically we are saying copy the ith element from input array, and there should be a semicolon as well. Yes, Gabe, you're right. Copy the ith element of the input array and copy it to the ith element in the output array. So all I'm going to do is copy Kristen's answer and say out underscore ARR of I equals to input underscore ARR of I. And we are going to then just run this code. As you can see, we are printing out the output array. And we see that the output array is currently 972425 and so on. Let me also say C out output array contents. I can just print it out in the same line. Yeah, output array contents is this thing. Cool. Any questions? Now, we can do this. Would it work to set output array I equals to input array? 9 minus I. Well, if you do 9 minus I, Gabe, what are you doing? You are basically saying, I am going to store at the 0th location. I am going to store 9 minus 0, so 9. At the 1th location, when I is 1, I am going to store 9 minus 1, that is 8, and so on. This would be a good thing to do for problem number 4 when we are flipping the array. But for this one, when we are just copying the array, I to I would work, right? Copying I to ith thing. Does that make sense? All right. Now, what we wanted to do now was to filter out all of the elements and that are greater than 10 and then print it out. One way to do it is to just do it directly here. I can just say, instead of storing it into the output array, I can just directly print out all elements that are greater than 10. Then this would become the display and the process block. This would not be anything or not do anything. I'll put our ENDL here. So right now, for example, it doesn't do anything. Output array is all garbage values. Oh, it does have garbage values. Cool. Output array is all garbage values. But I can just say that I want to only print out things that are greater than 10. Well, if that is the case, then we have an if condition. If a number is greater than 10, print it out. So I'll again be consuming each number one by one. I'm going to assume somebody gives me this number in a list and I see the first number, do something with it, then the next number, do something with it, and so on. So that is the ith number. And I can just say if the ith number at I is greater than, not greater than equals to, greater than 10, in that scenario, see out, sorry, input area of I is greater than 10. Then we are printing out, see out input area of I, maybe with a comma, right? If we do this, we will still be printing out the output array contents here, but we will be printing out all of the numbers greater than 10. If I run this code, I get this. Does this code, I hope this code makes sense. I'm going to copy this code and paste it onto Discord for now. This is not the right answer because we should be storing it into the output array. But I would like to now go to draw.io and just draw the flowchart diagram of this code. Okay. This code that just prints out the numbers that are greater than 10 from the input array and then prints out the output array one by one. Cool. So I'll come here. First things first, I will load up the code separately somewhere. And now let's draw. So I'll first have a start button. So that's start. Similarly, I'll also have an end somewhere at the end. This will not be the correct flowchart of this homework problem, but this will be the correct flowchart of this code. Okay. Now, after that, what do? We create an input array of size 10 and initialize it to these values. I'll just copy this thing. I'll create a new block and we'll say create int underscore arr. Just paste it here. Of size 10. That's good. After that, we are also going to create an output array. I did not need a separate rectangle for this, but it's fine. We'll just say create out underscore arr of 10 int. So let me connect the start thing to this thing. I'll connect this thing to this thing. Okay. Now, what do we do next? Well, there is a for loop that loops over every element and prints them out separately. Now, I know that I have asked you guys for flowchart diagrams before, and in there, I know that I have drawn for loops as if condition diamonds, or I asked you guys to do it. Remember that I'll be lenient for the submissions so far because we did not officially discuss how to draw flowcharts with loops and stuff. But from now onwards, I want us to see this flowchart diagram and try to follow this one. If there is any issues, let me know. But I am okay if you submitted a different version of flowcharts earlier. That was just for you to explore different opportunities to sort of print them out. Same goes for the dry run thing as well. I understand that I did not teach you guys properly dry run before. That was intentional. And now we are going to see how our dry run looks like, and we are going to fill them out properly. Okay. So now we have a for loop. What I would suggest is a diamond maintaining just the if condition with I plus plus and everything is fine if you want to do it like that. However, it becomes cumbersome real quick. So we'll just have a rectangle block, maybe a rounded rectangle or something, and we will list out the for variables step by step. So we have what? I equals to 0. Then we have I, I'll just say this is a for loop. So for loop where I equals to 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. Let's just say this is the init part, this is the condition part, and this is the update part. Okay, and we will just say this thing comes down here, and we will just say that if it is true, it comes back. If it is false, it will exit the loop. We will do that later. Otherwise, this thing is to be basically looping back up into here from the code body. So we are going to reduce the size of this thing a bit. First, let me now see what's inside the loop. Inside the loop, we have an if statement that checks this condition and then prints this out. Cool. If statements are still diamonds, I'm going to use diamonds here. The condition being INP underscore ARR of I coming from the loop. If that is greater than 10, question mark, we will do something. What will we do? Well, if it is true, we will do this. What will we do if it is true? Well, if it is true, we will just be printing out the element, right? So we will just say print INPARR of I. Once it prints it out, then what does it do? Well, if it is true, it prints it out. And can you guys tell me what's the next thing it will do once it finishes printing it out? Will it go back to the loop or will it go to the display block? Back to loop. Awesome. So we are going to do that. So let me draw this thing properly. If the loop is true, if the condition is true, it goes to this if condition. If this if condition is true now, if the loop is true, it goes to the if condition. If the if condition is true, it goes to the print statement, which should actually go back to the loop. I forgot how irritating it was with a mouse pad. So it's here. No, you guys still need to do it, but I won't. Hold on. So come on, you need to go here. Cool. And you need to come down. You need to go that away. You should also go that away. This should. Is that what I want? No. Now, what happens if it is false? This if condition was true, but this if condition could very well have been false. If it is false, do you guys agree that it will again go back to the loop? Back to question. Yes. So if it is false, we will say it goes here. Let's draw it nicely. I like my if statements to be on the side. So if it is false, it comes down here. And either way, if it is true, it prints it out and then goes back to the loop. If it is false, it does not do anything and just goes back to the loop. Okay. Hope this loop makes sense. And now, when will this loop end? This loop will end when I becomes 10. Once this I becomes 10, you will now go to the display block, right? The display block will sort of do the same thing. It will now basically come down here. Let me move this down a bit. And now we will have another for loop block like this. So a for loop block comes in here, that will just be printing it out. So for loop with init is I equals to 0, condition is again I less than 10, update is I plus plus, and essentially that's our loop. And if it is true, we'll do something. If it is false, we'll not do anything. Well, if it is true, what do we do? Well, if this is true, that is the loop's condition is true, we just keep on printing the current array element. So we'll just say, instead of input array I, we will just say print output array of I that gets stored up here. And after that, what will it do? It just keeps on looping back. All this happens if the loop condition is true. Where do we come here from though? Once the above loop became false, it printed out all of the input array elements. Then it basically went to this loop, right? So essentially, once this becomes false, it will then be coming down to this loop. Come on, be nice. So if this first loop is true, it keeps on printing numbers that are greater than 10. Once this loop becomes false, it comes back here. And this is the display block, which just prints out the output array garbage values for now. Now, if this becomes false, then what do we do? Well, if this becomes false, we just are done and we exit. So if this becomes false, this loop becomes false, we just come down to end. If this is false. So this is the flowchart diagram of this particular code. Let me save it as something. So save as PNG file, download the thing. Okay, downloaded. That was the code, and that is its corresponding flowchart diagram. I should make this in a white background. Let's see. Export as PNG, zoom, not transparent background, appearance light, grid, export. But PNG, download, untitled diagram 1. Let me just paste that instead. Diagram. Do you guys agree with this flowchart diagram? Does this flowchart diagram make sense? Okie dokie. Cool. So coming back. Now we have found a way to print out all of the elements that are greater than 10. But remember, that was not the job description. The job description was that we would need to store the things into the output array values and then print out the output array one after the other like normal. This is a very normal thing to do. You are never actually in real life asked to print out the numbers directly. Your code is actually processing something, filling out a result area, and then sending that result area to some other program for further processing, right? For example, Facebook might be filling out the process block with user input ID and stuff. And then once it is verified, it sends that data to, get the feed and whatnot, right? So all of the times you're always going to process something and create some variable out of that thing. So do you send it to something else, right? So that is the idea of this homework, that is to fill this output array out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that copy version of this code as we were discussing earlier. Instead of printing it out right then and there, I'm going to say output array of I equals to input array of I. Okay. So if we do that, now if we run this code, the process block is not going to print anything out like this anymore. It is just going to print out the output array. Before I do that though, I have a quick question. Will this work as per your homework specifications? You can say yes or you can say no. I will not be questioning you. I will be doing a dry run right now. This will not work exactly. Why? Because we are storing it in the ith location. So let's see. Let me run this code. So if I run this code, I get this as my output array. That is 9 is not greater than 10, so that's a 0 or garbage. 7 is not greater than 10, so 0. 2 and 4, 0 and 0. 25 is greater than 10, so it comes at the ith location. 25 here is at the location of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. At the fourth location, the number is 25, so that gets stored in output array 25 as well. 23 is stored in location 5, then 0, 0, 0, 20. This does filter out the numbers that are greater than 10, but it does not filter out the numbers. I mean, it does not fill it out in the right way. Remember, I want the output array to look like this, where the important numbers are squished to the left. Okay. So before we do that, let us actually do a dry run of this current code and see what is going on. Okay. So I'm going to open up an Excel sheet. I'm going to copy this code to the side and we are going to work over this Excel sheet, filling it out. So how do we fill out a dry run table? Well, it is very simple. All we have to do is list out all of the variables in our program one after the other and then a print column. So we'll one after the other, we'll just have a bunch of columns. So this is the line number column. By the way, for your homework, if you don't have the line column, that is fine. Then we have the input underscore array variable. Then we have output underscore array variable. What else do we have? We have an I variable, but we have seen that we are also using I for this loop and for this loop. This might get confusing. So what I'm going to do is we are going to say for, and this is not correct notation, but this is fine. For loops first I, for loops second I. Okay, that's the two I's. Am I missing anything else? No, nothing else. And we will also have a print column. Okay, so these are the columns that you would have. And we are going to now process these things one by one. So first things first, I should be looking at line numbers. Hold on. Okay. So first things first, we are going to create our input array. So all we are doing is tracing through our code step by step and just updating the variables as they change. Any change happens in a line, we just record. That's it, nothing else. So line number 11, we say that we are creating our input array. So our input array becomes this. Cool. So I'm going to copy this thing here and paste it here. Now line number 12, nothing else changes for this line. Then we have line number 12. Line number 12 creates an output array of garbage values. Cool. So I have 10 garbage values. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's your output array, line number 12 created. Now, next thing. Line number 16, I becomes 0. So line number 16, the first for loops I is 0. And input array and output array are these. Now let us scroll down. Now the next thing we are doing at line number 18 is input array of I greater than 0? Currently, guys, tell me, is input array of I greater than 0? Sorry, greater than 10. What is I currently? I currently is 0. Input array of I is 9. It is not greater than 10. So what happens next? Well, it will just go up and update the value of I. So it goes up and updates the value of I to 1. So which is again at line number 16. Now we are looking at input array of 1. Is it greater than 10? No, it's not. Goes back up, sets the value of I to 2. Input array of 2, 0, 1, 2 is 2. So it is not greater than 10. So moving on, I becomes 3. Input array of 3, 0, 1, 2, 3 is 4, not greater than 10. So skip. Moving on, I becomes 4. Ooh. Now, input array of 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is 25. So input array of 4 is 25. So what happens to the output array? Well, at line number 20 now, the if condition is now activated. We get the input array of 4, which is 25, and the current value of I is 4. So at output ARR 4, we are basically saying this thing, right? Output underscore ARR 4 equals to input underscore ARR 4. This is what we are saying in a sense. So I can just cut it and paste it here. So what does the output array become? I'll copy the top thing. I'll paste it back here. C, Control V. Well, at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This becomes 25. That was what happened when we printed out this particular array, right? We saw how basically it got that location as 25. This was why it happened, right? Now it has updated it. What happens next? Well, I becomes, it does this thing. But remember, if it is false, or if it is done, it just loops back up to that loop, right? Once it is printing it out or as assigning it, it then loops back up to that original condition, right? So we are basically going to loop back up. I becomes 5. Let's see if you guys understand this thing. I'm going to ask you the value of output ARR at I equals to 5. So again at line number 20, what will now be the new value of output ARR, given this is the current output ARR? That's the thing. So Alexander, when you guys are submitting the dry run, and if an array is there, you will always copy the full array to show the current contents. So you will not just say 23, you will please modify the text that I sent you and specify whereabouts is 23. I would like everybody to do the same. Abdullah, Engwen, and Donal as well. Exactly. Very good. I'm going to copy over this thing because that is just the value of I. That is 5. So we get this thing. Now that we have copied it over, I becomes 6. It is still less than 10. So it is checking again, is it more than, is the number more than 10? Well, sixth element is 2, so no. I becomes 7. 7 is still less than 10, the size of the array. So it basically checks the number next 8. Nothing doing, moves on. Note that up to now, nothing is printed. Print column is empty. The second for loops column is still empty. So now what do? Is we look at I equals to 7. So that is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Cool. So that is 7 here. We are looking at number 8. 8 is less than 10, so no point. Eighth element is 10. It is not greater than 10, so skip. Ninth element, which is the last one. Again, at line number 20, the thing gets active and we end up getting the last element getting 20 because that is where we are storing it. So that is the flowchart diagram so far. And now what do? We move on to the next part. It prints out two new line characters separately, ENDL, comma, ENDL. You don't need to write this thing. This is just there. Output array contents. So output array contents. This is what gets printed right now after all of this. And then what do? Well, now the second for loop starts. I is 0 at line number 29. This was at line number 27. This one was at line number 28. Cool. I is 0. We just print out currently the element at 0. So it prints out hash or garbage value. I becomes 1, 2, 3, and so on. Prints out garbage. I becomes 2. Prints out 0, 1, 2. So this garbage. I becomes 3. Prints out the next garbage here. I becomes 4. Prints out the next. So prints out 25 now. I becomes 5. Prints out 23 now, all with a comma separated. I becomes 6, prints out 3 more garbage values. So 6, 7, 8, all get garbage values, and 9 gets the value of 20. And that is the dry run for this code. Does this make sense? Okay. Now let's go back to the code. If this makes sense, now the question comes, how would we actually make sure that the numbers are stored in the right order? So any ideas? Any ideas on how to squish numbers to left? You guys can speak if you want to, or just type an answer. I understand if you are bored though. Okay, so here's the trick. Let me ask you a question first, another separate question, and we will then introduce a new type of thing. So you guys remember that we have been using variables for a while, and there were certain types of variables that we created, right? Types of variables. One was what? The number one was, the counter variable, right? Something to keep count of, right? Can you guys think of any other cases where we used variables? A special type of variable? Another one can be thought of as the flag variable that we kept track of, as in if something happened, keep track of that for the prime numbers and stuff. It was just a variable that kept track of this thing. Do you guys remember any other type? Do you remember that aggregate variable thing that we were doing, right? In order to find the sum of some numbers. We just kept track of the sum over time, and we call that a temporary variable, right? Temp variable or something. Do these variables, do you guys remember about, sort of remember about those variables types like counters, flag variables using, or aggregate variables, right? A bit. Okay, so counter variables was for IDs, I equals to 1, 2, 3. Flag was for the prime number. Find if any of the numbers are dividing the thing, set the flag, right? Aggregate variables were sort of temporary variables, get the product, get the thing, and so on, right? We are going to now use another type of variable where we are going to say, basically, the issue that we are facing here is we are storing the ith element into the ith element, right? Instead, why not store it somewhere else in the same array, but in a different location? Maybe maintain this location separately, and that location can start at 0. So even when we find 25 at the fourth location, we should still be inserting it at the 0th location, then move on the next free location to this area. If we find 23, we store it into the next free location, and then we move on the next free location to this area until we find a new element. We found a new element, store it into this next free location, and then move on the next free location to this area in anticipation of new numbers, right? Does that sort of make sense? So we are going to maintain a separate variable that will just keep track of where to store the value in the output array. The input array is still going to be driven by I, but the output array will be driven by something like J or some other variable that we will use to maintain where to store. Okay, so let us create a variable. Let's call it int free location. And we will say initially it is 0. Okay. Instead of storing the value into output ARR at I, we will say store the value at output ARR of free location. Okay. Now, if this is the code, can you guys tell me, given this code, what will be the value of output array? We are not changing free lock at all. We are just saying out, if you find a number greater than 10, store it into the free lock location, the ith element. Any ideas what will be the result of output array? Give me the full array, Alexander. Ahmed, are you sure? What happens here? Free lock remains 0. I find 25, 25 goes in the 0th location. Next, I will find 23. Wouldn't 23 again go in the 0th location? I'm not changing free lock. And then later down the line, 2 I skip, 8 I skip, 10 I skip, then I get 20. I'll go and store it in the 0th location. I would say this one will be 20 followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 garbage numbers. Do you agree with this thing? Because the last number will be overwriting the first number every time, and then essentially nothing else gets updated. So how can we make sure that these are all squished together? Any ideas? What if the moment we store a number, that location is no longer free? What if we then move on to the next available location here? So instead of storing it here, we can just say free underscore lock plus plus. Every time we find a number that is greater than 10, we store it into the free location and update free location to point to the next thing. That makes sense? If we do that, we can now run the code and we see that this is output array. I am okay if you print out garbage values at the end, but you see that all the numbers greater than 10 are now packed together to the left hand side. Correct? If that is the case, let us do a dry run. I am not going to do the flowchart thing of this code, but I am going to do a dry run and paste the dry run on Discord. So feel free to look into that thing. Okay, so let's do a dry run. I'll list out all of the variables that we have. So firstly, we have input, so line, then we have input array, then we have output array, then we have free lock, then we have for loops I, so for I1, then we have I free lock, that's all there. Then we just have the last for loops I. So for loop of I underscore 2, and then we have just the print block. Correct? So that's all these statements. Cool. So line number 11, I'm setting up my input array to this set of numbers. Everything else remains as it is. Then we are at line number 12, where we are setting the output array. Just copy that thing. So that's output array getting created here. And then line number 13, you guys don't need to be that meticulous about the line numbers, but that's fine. Free lock is 0. Now line number 16, for loops I becomes 0. Now what are we doing? Well, we have this now. Is the 0th element more than 10? Is 9 more than 10? No, it's not. Moving on to the next element. Is the 1th element more than 10? 2, 7 is not more than 10, so moving on to the next element. Is the 2th element more than 10? 2th element is 2, it's not more than 10, so skip, move on to the next element. Is the 3th element more than 10? Well, 3th element is 4, so we will move on to the next element. Is the 4th element more than 10? Why, yes, it is. So if the fourth element is more than 10, the if condition gets active and line number 20 gets active. Line number 20 does what? Line number 20 says copy the ith element, so the fourth element, that is 25. So it is saying output underscore ARR of free lock, which is currently 0, right? Equals to input underscore ARR of 4, which is the element that was just found. That is how we are using free lock here, right? So I'm going to delete this thing. I'm going to copy this over and paste it here. And I know that free lock is 0. So I'm going to, at the 0th location, set the value to 25. I hope this makes sense. Okay, moving on. Hold on, give me a sec. Okay. Now that we have copied, what happens next? Can you guys tell me? Let's see if you guys are paying attention. What happens next? Does I become 5 next? Or are we missing anything? We are missing the free lock plus plus thing, right? We have to do a free lock plus plus after we update this thing. So line number 21, free lock plus plus, free lock now points to the next available location. It just inserted something in the 0th location, and it is now going to point to the next available location in anticipation of new numbers coming in. It will always point to the next available guy. So basically imagine that you are the guy who maintains a storage unit. You just point to the available location. As you get more numbers, you just keep on pointing to the next available location. Then I becomes 5. Fifth element is 23. So free lock is basically again, so line number 20. Free lock is now 1. So output array is now going to store 23 in the 1th location. So that's that. And then free lock is going to become 2 in anticipation of new numbers. And now I become 6. Sixth element is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sixth element is 2, that is not greater than 10. I become 7. Seventh element is 8, so that is not greater than 10. I becomes 8. Eighth element is 10. 10 is not greater than 10. So I becomes 9. 9 element is greater than 10. So 20 is greater than 10. So the line is active again, 20. I'll copy this thing over, and we will now insert this new number in the free lock location, which last anticipated the number and said it was going to be at 2 next, because that is the next available location. It stores 20 there in this particular location, and after that free lock becomes 3 in anticipation of more numbers, because it does not know whether there will be more numbers. And then I becomes 10. 10 is where the condition fails and it exits out. Once it exits out, the top loop is done, and now comes the bottom loop. Bottom loop again now is just going to print out two ENDLs. We are basically done. It prints out output array contents. And then, so these are all at line numbers 28 and 29. And then after that, what does it do? It sets up its own I value to 0. That is line number 30. And it prints out the element at element 0. So at line number 32, I'm just going to print it out in the same line. It prints out, what will it print out, guys? I see, we are both, it's fine. 25. And then I becomes 1. It prints out 23. I becomes 2. It prints out 20. I becomes 3. It prints out garbage. 4 prints out garbage. 5 prints out garbage. 6 prints out garbage. 7 prints out garbage. 8 prints out garbage. 9 prints out garbage. 10 it stops. Does this dry run make sense? We paste it on here and on Discord. And I'm going to resubmit this thing. And upload it to. Okay. So does this help? Do you guys now sort of understand how to do a flowchart diagram and a dry run? In a sense, will you guys be able to work on these on your own now? We will be meeting again on Tuesday. But yeah, and Wednesday as well. Cool, cool. Then that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for attending this extra session. I'm going to stop the recording, stop the transcription.